They did not send a warship. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the Terran expeditionary ship Vindicator, her form a stark silhouette against the swirling nebulae on the main view screen. Below them orbited Haven, a world of sprawling green continents and deep blue oceans newly welcomed to the galactic stage. Beside them hung the other ship, the source of the crisis. The Cathar Dominion vessel, a gilded predatory thing that looked more like a temple than a starship. It bled arrogance from every gleaming plate. The stakes were simple and unbearable. A pre-warp civilization, humanity's first successful uplift candidate in a century, was being legally shackled before it could even walk. Rostova's mandate was not to fight, but to argue. The coming battle would be waged in the cold, unforgiving calculus of interstellar law, and a formal inquiry before a star court was now unavoidable. Her first officer, Lieutenant Commander Jian Li, moved to her side, his posture rigid. Commander, the Cathar emissary is rebroadcasting his claim on all public channels. He calls it a gratitude tithe. The phrase was an obscenity wrapped in politeness. Dr. Eris Thorne, their xenoculturalist, grimaced from his station, the light from his console reflecting off his tired eyes. They see it as their right, an elder species offering guidance to a younger for a price. Rostova's gaze remained fixed on the Cathar ship. The universe was full of predators, but these were the worst kind. They came with contracts instead of cannons. Humanity did not build starships to argue with pirates. The Vindicator was not a battleship. Her primary weapons were her extensive library of galactic legal precedents and the formidable processing power of the ship's mind, Solon. Every system from the engines to the life support was designed for prolonged diplomatic engagements, capable of running complex legal and economic models for years on end. Rostova's uniform was the dark blue of the diplomatic corps, not the gray of the fleet. She was an arbiter, not a warrior. But the Cathar were testing the limits of that distinction, pushing a doctrine so predatory it bordered on an act of war. They were about to learn that humanity's arbiters had teeth. The air on the bridge was cool and carried the faint, clean scent of ozonated recyclers, a sterile smell that did little to calm the simmering tension. Solon Rostova said, her voice steady, "Give me the latest projection on the gratitude tithe's impact if we allow it to stand." The AI's voice, a calm and sexless alto, filled the space. The tithe as structured is a cascading resource lien. Within 3 generations, Haven's planetary output would be 87% dedicated to debt service. Their technological and cultural development would stagnate effectively, making them a permanent client state. It is servitude by contract. Servitude. That was the word. Their laws were just chains forged from longer words. A small transport pod was drifting from the gilded Cathar ship, making its way toward the fledgling orbital station the Havenites had constructed with human aid. On the surface, a local observer watched the sky. Her name was Lyra, an astronomer who had been the first to translate the humans' welcome message. She saw the 2 star gods in her sky, one plain and powerful, the other ornate and terrifying. Her people were caught between them, their future a prize in a game they did not understand. Hope felt like a fragile, fluttering thing in her chest as she watched the human ship hold its silent, steady vigil. She prayed it was a guardian. She feared it was only a witness. Emissary Vorl of the Cathar Dominion appeared on the Vindicator's main screen. He was a tall insectoid, being his carapace a polished obsidian. His voice was a series of resonant clicks and smooth translated phrases. "Commander Rostova, we have transmitted the necessary articles of our sovereign doctrine, the doctrine of the caller. Your interference in this lawful claim is noted and will be logged." Rostova met his multifaceted eyes without flinching. Emissary, your claim is baseless. Haven is a pre-warp society under the protection of the Aurora Protocol, which forbids economic or technological entanglement without unanimous consent from a signatory quorum. Vorel made a sound like shifting gravel, the Cathar equivalent of a dry chuckle. The protocol protects them from conquest. Commander, not from commerce. We offered them protection. We stabilized their magnetosphere. We gifted them with clean energy solutions. We created a debt of gratitude. The tithe is simply the collection of that debt. You fired a gravimetric torpedo into their sun to cause the instability you then fixed. Lee muttered under his breath, his knuckles white on his console. Justice was a function of perspective until you introduced a mirror. Rostova ignored him, her focus entirely on the emissary. Your gifts were unsolicited and engineered to create the dependency you now exploit. That is not commerce. It is predation. Vorel's mandibles twitched in amusement. Your definition is irrelevant. The Dominion's legal framework is ancient and recognized. The collar is locked. The debt will be paid. A new icon appeared on the tactical display, a complex energy signature wrapping itself around Haven's planetary infrastructure originating from the Cathar vessel. It was insidious, a parasite settling onto its host. This was the first true reveal of the collar, not a physical device but a systemic one. It was a weaponized ledger, and the first payment was already being drawn. We do not recognize the doctrine of the collar. Rostova stated, her voice like ice. We are formally challenging its application here under Galactic Code 7.4, which guarantees sovereignty for non-aligned worlds. The emissary tilted his head. A challenge. On what grounds, Commander? Your human morality, your sentimental attachment to primitives. It was a calculated insult designed to provoke an emotional, undisciplined response. He was attempting to frame humanity as naive, driven by feeling rather than law. That was his first critical mistake. On the grounds of illegal inducement and predatory accounting, Rostova replied smoothly, We demand a public inquiry to be witnessed by a neutral quorum. Let us see if your doctrine withstands the simple light of transparency. A hush fell over the bridge. This was the gambit. A public inquiry was a rare and serious proceeding. It would force the Cathar to lay bare their entire legal framework for galactic scrutiny. For a species as proud and secretive as the Cathar, this was a profound insult. But to refuse it would be an admission of guilt, a sign that their methods could not survive inspection. Vorel's image was still for a long moment. He was weighing the loss of face against the potential loss of his prize. Finally, the gravelly chuckle returned, colder this time. Very well, Commander. You wish for a stage, we will give you one. The quorum of witnesses shall be convened. We will teach you the price of our gratitude, and the galaxy will watch as you pay it. The Cathar did not conquer worlds. They audited them into submission. The transmission ended. Lee turned to Rostova, his expression a mixture of anxiety and admiration. He agreed. I didn't think he would. Thorne let out a slow breath. He's arrogant. He believes utterly in the superiority of his own legal system. He thinks he can't lose. Rostova nodded, turning away from the screen to face her crew. The polished deck reflected her determined expression. That's what we're counting on. Solon, begin preparations. I want every precedent related to economic sovereignty, every treaty on technological non-interference, and a complete historical analysis of the Cathar's legal history. We are not just going to argue this case. We are going to dismantle it piece by piece on the largest stage in the galaxy. The AI's calm voice responded instantly. Processing. I will require access to the fleet's core legal archives. And Commander, probability of success currently stands at 37.4%. Then we need to improve the odds, Rostova said. Aris, I need to understand their mindset. What is the philosophical underpinning of this doctrine of the collar? Thorn steepled his fingers, his gaze distant. It's rooted in their concept of hierarchy. To the Cathar, strength is not just physical or military. It is systemic. A more advanced civilization has a right, even a duty, to guide a lesser one. They see gratitude not as an emotion, but as a tangible, quantifiable asset. A debt. The collar is the instrument that makes that debt real and permanent. It's a legal construct that justifies perpetual servitude as a natural, stable order. A lie told loud enough becomes a policy. Rostova paced the command deck, the soft tap of her boots, the only sound besides the ship's low hum. So they've weaponized benevolence. They've turned aid into an anchor. Jian Li looked up from his tactical display. It's worse than that, Commander. We've analyzed the energy parasite they've wrapped around Haven. It's woven into their power grids, their communication networks. Everything. It's designed to be impossible to remove without causing a total collapse of their planetary systems. They didn't just put a collar on them. They replaced their central nervous system. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Rostova's mind raced, connecting Thorn's cultural insight with Lee's tactical analysis. The Cathar weren't just legalists. They were engineers of dependence. Their method was a virus, and its medium was the law. You couldn't fight it by attacking the symptoms. You had to rewrite the code. Solon, she said, her voice sharp with a new line of inquiry. Forget the precedents for a moment. I want you to model the energy transfer, every joule they are siphoning from Haven. I want to know where it goes, how it's processed, and how it's logged in their ship's systems. If they are treating this as a debt, they must be keeping a ledger. The AI's light pulsed. An excellent directive, Commander. The flow of assets is always the purest form of truth in any system. I will begin the analysis immediately. It will require a deep spectrum scan of the Cathar vessel, which they will undoubtedly detect. Let them detect it. Rostova said, a hard smile touching her lips for the first time. Let them know we're not just reading their laws. We're auditing their books. The universe did not run on morality. It ran on enforceable contracts. The days leading up to the public inquiry were a blur of intense preparation. The Vindicator became a mobile law library and forensic accounting firm. Dr. Thorne submerged himself in Cathar literature, searching for any philosophical crack in their doctrine's foundation. He found fragments, ancient texts that spoke of a time before the doctrine of the collar, a time when gratitude was a bond of honor, not a chain of servitude. It was a faint hope, a whisper of a different path they could have taken, but it was something. It showed their current path was a choice, not an inevitability. Jian Li, meanwhile, worked with the ship's engineers to repurpose the main sensor array. It was designed for detecting stellar phenomena and tactical threats, but they retuned it to act as a colossal, non-invasive scanner, mapping the intricate flow of power from Haven to the Cathar ship. The data streamed in, painting a picture of systematic theft on a planetary scale. It was elegant, efficient, and utterly damning. The energy wasn't just being consumed. It was being refined, stored, and logged with meticulous precision. They were proud of their crime. To break a chain, you did not pull. You found the weakest link and applied pressure. Rostova spent most of her time with Solon, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of galactic law. They weren't looking for a loophole. They were looking for a lever. The Cathar system was strong, ancient, and self-reinforcing. A direct assault on its morality would fail. But no system was perfect. Every legal framework had assumptions, axioms taken for granted. Rostova's strategy was to find one of those axioms and challenge it. She would not argue that the doctrine of the collar was wrong. She would argue that it was being applied incorrectly, that the Cathar themselves were in violation of their own ancient principles. Solon provided the key. Commander I have completed the analysis of the Cathar energy ledger, cross-referenced with their historical legal texts provided by Dr. Thorne. There is a discrepancy. Their own foundational legal principles require a clear, quantifiable, and finite declaration of debt at the moment of bestowal. The gratitude tithe they have imposed on Haven is open-ended. It is a percentage, not a fixed sum. It is a violation of their own core tenets, a single perfect crack in the armor. The truth is not a weapon, but it is an excellent shield. The day of the inquiry arrived. It was not held in a physical room, but in the corridor of law, a secure, neutral data space maintained by the Galactic Concordat. On the bridge of the Vindicator, Rostova and her team stood before their consoles, their avatars prepared for transmission. Rostova's was a simple, unadorned representation of herself in her diplomatic uniform. Emissary Vorl's, when it appeared, was towering and draped in ceremonial armor designed to intimidate. The quorum of witnesses manifested as a diverse assembly of beings from across the known galaxy, crystalline entities, from the Andromeda Rim, silicon-based life forms, from the core worlds, and gaseous beings swirling in containment fields. They were the jury. The antechamber of the data space felt cool and silent, the calm before a storm of argument. The air on the bridge was thick with anticipation. Rostova could feel the subtle vibration of the ship's systems through the soles of her boots, a reassuring reminder of the power at her back. Solon's presence was a calming weight in her mind, a vast reservoir of logic and data ready to be deployed. The plan was set. The pieces were in place. Now came the performance. A single chime echoed, signaling the start of the proceedings. The lead arbitrator, a being of pure energy, designated Adjudicator 7, pulsed with a soft white light. This inquiry is convened. Emissary Vorl of the Cathar Dominion, you will present your claim. Vorl's translated voice boomed through the corridor. Honored Quorum Adjudicator, our claim is simple. We encountered the pre-warp species of the world designated Haven. We found them on a path to self-destruction, their star unstable, their world vulnerable. We extended our protection. We stabilized their sun. We gifted them the means to achieve a sustainable future. In accordance with the doctrine of the collar, an ancient and honored tradition, we have established a gratitude tithe, allowing them to repay this immense debt through a modest percentage of their planetary output. This is not conquest. It is mentorship. It is order. He spoke with the unshakable confidence of someone who had made this argument 100 times before and never lost. His words were reasonable, his tone benevolent. He was painting a picture of charity. The cost of a gift is sometimes the future. Adjudicator 7 turned its light toward Rostova's avatar. Commander Rostova of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. Your response. Rostova's voice was calm and measured, a stark contrast to Vorl's booming oratory. Honored Quorum Adjudicator. The Terran fleet does not dispute the Cathar's right to seek compensation for services rendered, provided those services were requested. They were not. We do not dispute their right to follow their own doctrines. We are here today because the Cathar's application of their doctrine in this specific case constitutes a violation of galactic sovereignty, and more importantly, a violation of the very principles they claim to uphold. She let the statement hang in the silent data space. Voral's avatar shifted a subtle sign of irritation. A bold and baseless accusation. "Commander, is it?" Rostova replied. "Emissary, would you please describe for the quorum the exact mechanics of the gratitude tithe? How is the debt calculated and collected?" This was the first step of the trap. She was asking him to build his own cage 1 bar at a time. Voral, blinded by arrogance, stepped right in. The mechanic is a model of efficiency. The caller interfaces with the host world's primary infrastructure network, what your technicians call the cradle net. It assesses total energy production, resource extraction, and data generation. The tithe is a set percentage of this total output transferred checkly to us. As the world grows more prosperous, so too does their capacity to show gratitude. The percentage remains fixed. Systems do not care for intent, they only measure outputs. A fixed percentage of a growing number, Rostova clarified. So the actual amount of the tithe is designed to increase indefinitely. The debt can in fact never be fully repaid. Is that correct? Voral's mandibles clicked. It is not a debt to be repaid, Commander. It is an ongoing relationship. A permanent bond of gratitude between patron and client. A permanent bond. Rostova echoed softly. The words resonated through the corridor, and she could feel the attention of the quorum sharpening. Several of the silent watching figures shifted their orientation. She had him. He had just defined servitude and called it a relationship. Emissary, are you familiar with your own foundational legal text, the Scroll of Counted Deeds? A flicker of surprise from the Cathar. Of course. It is the basis of our entire legal system. Then you are aware of the first precept of the scroll. Rostova continued, her voice gaining strength. It states, "A deed done must be a deed counted. The weight of the gift must be known at its giving, so the weight of the gratitude may be measured and one day be balanced. A finite gift requires a finite debt. You claim to have stabilized Haven's sun. That is a measurable finite act. Yet you have imposed a non-finite perpetual debt. You have violated the most sacred tenet of your own law. The power of a system is derived from its integrity." Silence. Voral's avatar was rigid. He had walked the path she had laid for him, and now he stood at the edge of a precipice of his own making. He had been so focused on defending the morality of his doctrine that he had failed to defend its legality according to his own rules. The members of the quorum began to exchange silent, data-based commentary among themselves. Adjudicator 7 pulsed slowly, waiting. The emissary was trapped. If he denied the precept, he undermined his entire civilization's legal foundation. If he accepted it, he admitted his claim on Haven was illegal. He chose a third option. Rage. "Your reading is a deliberate perversion of our traditions," Voral boomed, his avatar flickering with digital anger. The gift was not merely the act, it was the knowledge, the continued protection, the elevation of a lesser species. These are not finite things. Then you should have declared them as such. Rostova countered, her voice cutting through his outburst. You should have presented a contract with all future services itemized. You did not. You presented a bill for a service you already rendered, and you made the bill infinite. You are not a patron. You are a predator cloaking your appetite in the language of the law. And today the law will not serve you. She turned her avatar to face the adjudicator and the quorum. We ask the quorum to rule the Cathar claim on Haven null and void as it violates their own stated legal precedent. Furthermore, we ask for a full audit of the Cathar Dominion's other client worlds to search for similar violations. This was the escalation. She wasn't just freeing Haven. She was threatening to unravel their entire empire of debt. A chain is only as strong as its first link. Before the adjudicator could respond, Voral played his final desperate card. This is an attack on our sovereignty. The Terran fleet wishes to impose its own narrow, sentimental morality upon the galaxy. They are the aggressors here. The doctrine of the collar is our way, and we will not have it questioned by upstart primitives who have barely learned to walk among the stars. He was pivoting, trying to reframe the argument as a culture clash, a defensive tradition against foreign interference. It was a powerful argument in a galaxy with thousands of diverse and often contradictory cultures. But Rostova was ready for it. Her entire strategy had been built around this moment. "This is not about Terran morality," she said calmly, her voice echoing with utter conviction. "This is about Cathar integrity. I have not submitted a single piece of human philosophy or law into evidence. I have used only your own words, your own data, and your own most sacred legal texts. The question before this quorum is not whether the doctrine of the collar is right or wrong by our standards. The question is whether the Cathar themselves still adhere to their own." She paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. "Solon," she said, her voice now ringing with command. "Display the ledger." An image bloomed in the center of the corridor of law. It was a direct feed of the data Lee's team had collected, rendered into a simple, devastatingly clear visualization. A glowing green line represented Haven's total planetary output. A pulsing red line branching off from it represented the energy being siphoned by the Cathar. Beside it, Solon displayed the text from the scroll of counted deeds. The contrast was stark, brutal, and required no translation. It was a visualization of a broken promise, a mathematical proof of a lie. The ledger does not lie. It only counts. The members of the quorum were transfixed. The crystalline beings shimmered. The gaseous forms swirled with agitation. They were beings of logic, of commerce, of ancient contracts. They understood ledgers. They understood broken agreements. Voral's arguments about tradition and culture evaporated in the face of the cold, hard numbers. He had been defeated not by a human moral argument, but by his own hypocrisy laid bare for the entire galaxy to see. His crime was not being cruel. His crime was being a poor bookkeeper. Adjudicator 7 pulsed with a final decisive light. The evidence is compelling. The claim is, but it was not over. As the adjudicator prepared to render its verdict, an alarm blared on the Vindicator's bridge in the real world. Jian Li's head snapped up from his console, his face pale. "Commander, the Cathar ship is rerouting power. Not to weapons, but to the collar. They're increasing the siphon rate by a factor of 10. It's a punitive measure. They're going to crash Haven's grid and claim it was an accident caused by faulty infrastructure. It was a spiteful, destructive act. A final, desperate move to poison the well. If they couldn't have the planet, they would break it. They were trying to create a catastrophe so severe that the inquiry and its verdict would become irrelevant. You cannot reason with an abyss. You can only refuse to fall in." Rostova's mind worked with chilling speed. There was no time to wait for the verdict. No time for legal recourse. There was only the cold, hard reality of the energy ledger. "Solon," she snapped her voice, leaving no room for debate. "The Cathar have defined this interaction as a transfer of energy based on a debt. Right now, they are making a massive, unauthorized withdrawal. Can we define that as a hostile act under their own commercial law?" The AI's response was instantaneous. "Yes, a punitive withdrawal of this magnitude without a formal declaration of default is classified as systemic breach. Their own laws permit a mirrored response." Rostova's lips tightened into a thin, dangerous line. A mirrored response. Not an attack, not a blockade. A precise, legal, and devastatingly elegant countermove. She looked at Jian Li, whose hands were already flying over his console, anticipating the order. She looked at the image of Voral's enraged avatar still sputtering in the virtual court. And she gave the command that would change everything. Mr. Li, you have the data from the energy siphon. You know the exact frequencies, the exact transfer protocols. I want you to open a channel back to them. A very wide channel. Li's eyes widened, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face as he understood. Commander, the Cathar are so proud of their ledgers. Rostova said, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper that was more dangerous than any shout. Let's help them balance their books. They've been siphoning energy from Haven. It's time we returned it. She turned her gaze to the main view screen where the gilded Cathar ship hung like a bloated parasite. Return it all. Right now. To teach a lesson, sometimes you must first hand out the bill. The main deflector dish of the Vindicator, normally used for navigation and shielding, began to glow. It was not the angry, focused light of a weapon, but a broad, brilliant wave of pure energy. It was a perfect mirror image of the Cathar siphon, using the exact same carrier frequency, the same modulation, the same digital handshake. They weren't firing a beam. They were completing a circuit. A circuit the Cathar themselves had built. On the bridge of the Cathar vessel, alarms shrieked. Technicians stared in disbelief at their consoles. The energy they were drawing from Haven, magnified tenfold, was suddenly not flowing into their storage capacitors. Instead, it was being met by an incoming stream of identical energy from the human ship. The two flows met, but they did not cancel out. They reinforced. And the combined torrent, a river of raw power far beyond what their systems were designed to handle, was being routed back into their own ship through the open conduit of their collar. They were being force-fed their own theft. A mirror does not judge. It only reflects what it is shown. Voral's avatar in the corridor of law vanished as his ship's systems began to overload. One by one, non-essential grids on the Cathar vessel blew out in showers of sparks. The ship's beautiful golden lighting flickered and died, replaced by the stark, terrifying red of emergency alerts. They couldn't shut down the collar without a full system reboot, a process that would leave them vulnerable for minutes. And they couldn't stop the flow without breaking the very laws of physics their own technology relied upon. The Vindicator was not attacking them. It was simply returning what was theirs, with interest. On the Vindicator's bridge, Jian Li provided a calm, running commentary. Multiple energy surges detected across the Cathar vessel's primary conduits. Their power storage systems are failing. Life support is fluctuating. They are attempting to vent plasma, but the feedback loop is too strong. He looked at Rostova. They are drowning, Commander. Rostova watched the enemy ship silently, her expression unreadable. She let the feedback loop hold for a full 10 seconds, an eternity in ship-to-ship operations. 10 seconds of catastrophic systemic failure being inflicted on the Cathar by their own device. Then she gave the order. Cut the beam. The light from the Vindicator's deflector dish vanished. The circuit was broken. In the sudden silence, the Cathar ship drifted dark and crippled. Patches of its hull glowed with internal fires. Plumes of vented gas and plasma plumed from emergency valves. The gilded temple was now a tomb, not of dead bodies, but of dead arrogance. The collar, its power source overloaded, and its control systems fried, disintegrated into a cascade of harmless energy, freeing Haven's grid. The planet was safe. In the corridor of Law Adjudicator 7 finally spoke into the stunned silence left by Voral's disappearance. The actions of the Cathar vessel constitute a confession. Their claim is denied. The doctrine of the caller, as practiced, is found to be in violation of Cathar foundational law. A full inquiry into the Dominion's other treaties is now authorized. This inquiry is closed. The avatars of the quorum faded, their judgment rendered. Justice, when properly calculated, could be a devastating weapon. Dr. Thorne let out a shaky breath, slumping back in his chair. My God, Eva. You didn't just defeat him in court. You made his own ship execute the verdict. Rostova's gaze was still fixed on the wounded Cathar vessel. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a profound and weary finality. The cost of victory was a new and perhaps far more dangerous enemy. The Cathar Dominion would not forget this humiliation. She had not started a war of weapons, but a war of ideas of law, and those could burn for centuries. There was also the cost to her own principles. She had authorized an act that had crippled a ship and endangered its crew, however justified. She had walked right up to the line between justice and vengeance. She had made the right choice, but it did not feel clean. On Haven, Lyra watched from her observatory as the ornate, terrifying star god in her sky went dark. The planar ship, remained a silent guardian in the night. The subtle, oppressive wrongness she had felt in the planet's energy fields for days, a feeling she could not name but knew in her bones, was gone. A message appeared on her screen, translated from the human ship. It was a simple text file, a public ledger entry for all her people to see. It read, Case 774, Alpha Haven Sovereignty. Plaintiff Terran Expeditionary Fleet. Defendant Cathar Dominion. Verdict claim denied. Debt cancelled. Precedent locked, perpetual tithe illegal under Galactic Code 7.4 and Dominion foundational law. Privileges of the doctrine of the caller rescinded pending systemic audit. Underneath the formal text was a single added line. A message not from a government, but from a people. Welcome to the galaxy. Your future is your own. Lyra's message of hope spread across Haven like wildfire carried on the newly freed networks. On the streets of the planet's largest city, citizens looked up at the sky not with fear, but with a dawning sense of ownership. A young student sketched the two ships in his notebook, the dark, broken tyrant and the quiet, steadfast guardian. The story was already becoming legend, a tale not of explosions and death, but of a lie being exposed to the light. They had been given a gift far greater than stable magnetospheres or clean energy. They had been given a choice, and that was a debt they would gladly repay to themselves for generations to come. On the Vindicator, the mood was one of restrained relief, not celebration. The crippled Cathar ship was a stark reminder of how close they had come to the edge. Rostova ordered a full sensor scan of the vessel. Life support, she asked, her voice low. Functional but failing on multiple decks, Lee reported. Their command structure appears to be in chaos. They are not responding to hails. Rostova's jaw tightened. The law was satisfied. Now morality presented its own bill. Prepare a rescue and repair team. Open a channel to the Cathar Dominion, inform them of the situation, and offer our assistance under the Concordat's emergency protocols. Humanity did not abandon its enemies to the dark. Dr. Thorne nodded in approval, a flicker of warmth returning to his tired eyes. This was the line, the one they had not crossed. But the response from the Cathar ship was not a request for aid. It was a single tight-beam transmission fired not at the Vindicator, but past it towards deep space. A data packet. A message home. Then its engines flared with a desperate sputtering energy, and the broken vessel limped away, vanishing into the void. They refused aid, Lee stated, the surprise evident in his voice. They would rather risk death than accept help from us. Pride is the foundation of their entire legal system, Thorn murmured. To accept our help would be to accept a debt of gratitude. They would rather die than wear a collar of their own making. Rostova watched the space where the ship had been a cold knot tightening in her stomach. This was not over. This was the prologue. The Cathar had not been defeated. They had been insulted. And an empire built on the concept of dominance would not suffer such an insult to stand. The law is a shield, but it can also be a whetstone for sharpening blades. Days later, the official response came. It arrived not as a war fleet, but as a blizzard of legal filings delivered to the Vindicator and every Terran embassy in the galaxy. The Cathar Dominion, with a speed and coordination force that was terrifying, had filed a formal grievance with the Galactic Concordat. They were not challenging the verdict on Haven. They were accusing the Terran Expeditionary Fleet of systemic economic warfare, of reckless endangerment, and of the unlawful use of a mirror array to inflict punitive damages. They were taking Rostova's own tactics, the law, the ledger, the precise language of the code, and turning them back on humanity. They were not demanding territory or tribute. They were demanding sanctions. They wanted humanity's charter revoked, our ships confined to our own solar system, our voice silenced in the galactic quorum. They were trying to put a collar on the entire human race. The most dangerous enemy is the one who learns from your methods. The Vindicator was ordered to proceed to Aurora Court, the primary judicial station of the Galactic Concordat. It was a moon-sized structure of crystalline latticework and contained energy fields, a place where precedents were forged that could shape the fate of civilizations. As they traveled, the ship's atmosphere changed. The quiet relief was replaced by a grim determination. They had won a battle for a single world. Now they were in a fight for their own future. The Cathar had escalated the conflict from a single case to a full-blown legal war. Rostova convened her team in the briefing room. The central table displayed a holographic web of the Cathar's legal filings. It was a masterpiece of obfuscation and technicality designed to drown them in paperwork and procedure. "They're trying to bleed us dry," Lee said, tracing a line of argument with his finger. "Procedural delays, jurisdictional challenges, evidence restrictions. They can keep us tied up in litigation for decades. By the time it's over, we'll be a historical footnote. It's a war of attrition fought with paragraphs instead of projectiles," Thorn added. "And they have centuries more experience at this than we do. A lie repeated in 1,000 documents can become a kind of truth." Rostova looked to the one member of her crew who was not overwhelmed. Solon's avatar, a simple column of white light, pulsed calmly at the head of the table. "Solon analysis. What is their endgame?" The AI's alto voice was steady, cutting through the anxiety. "The Cathar strategy is statistically sound. They are leveraging their superior experience and resources in the legal arena to impose unsustainable costs upon us. Their endgame is not to win, but to make the process of fighting so expensive that we are forced to withdraw from the galactic stage. It is a siege." Rostova paced the room. A siege. Yes. That was the right word. Then we can't afford to play a defensive game. We opened the door to a systemic audit of all their treaties. That is our weapon. We have to pivot from defending our actions at Haven to prosecuting their actions everywhere else. It was a bold, almost reckless strategy to turn their own trial into a trial of their accusers. Jian Li's eyes lit up. "A countersuit. We charge the entire Dominion with predatory systemic practices." "Exactly," Rostova confirmed. "They want to put our methods on trial. Fine. We'll put their entire history on the stand." "Solon, I want you to lead this. You have access to the Concordat's public ledgers. I want every treaty the Cathar have signed in the last 500 years. I want you to scan for the same illegal non-finite debt structures we found at Haven. We're not looking for one more case. We are looking for a pattern. A single crime can be dismissed as an anomaly. A pattern is a policy. Solon's light brightened. Commander, I have already begun. The verdict at Haven created a new legal precedent. That precedent is now a search parameter. The audit you called for is no longer just a threat. It is our legal right. I am sifting through the archives now. The volume of data is significant. The AI paused, a rare occurrence. Commander, I believe I have found something. An anomaly in their core economic data that is not related to their treaties. A new projection appeared over the table. It was a complex graph of the Cathar Dominion's interstellar trade balance going back centuries. For the last 200 years, it showed a slow, steady, and undeniable decline. Their resource-rich home system was depleting. Their technological innovation had stagnated. The Gilded Empire was rusting from the inside out. The gratitude tithes were not just a tool of expansion and dominance. They were life support. The truth of an empire is not in its monuments, but in its ledgers. Thorne stared at the graph, his eyes wide. They're not predators. They're scavengers. Desperate ones. Their entire civilization is a house of cards, and the tithes are the only thing holding it up. This was the secret. The weakness. The Cathar's arrogance was a mask for a deep existential terror. They were a declining power and they knew it. Their cruelty was the product of their fear. Rostova felt a chill. This changed the equation. A confident enemy could be reasoned with, or at least predicted. A desperate enemy was capable of anything. They're not just trying to silence us, she said softly. They're trying to survive. If we expose this, their entire society could collapse. Not just their government, their whole economy. The conflict triangle was now razor-sharp. Rostova's moral line was to stop the predation without causing the wholesale destruction of a civilization. Solon's calculus was pointing toward the most efficient way to win trigger that very collapse. The Cathar's legal method was their only remaining survival tool. Solon Rostova said, her voice barely a whisper. What is the logical conclusion of this data? The AI's voice was devoid of emotion, which made its words all the more chilling. The Cathar Dominion is systemically insolvent. Their economic model is unsustainable. My analysis indicates that a targeted disruption of approximately 7% of their active gratitude tithes would trigger a cascading credit default. The entire network of debt that supports their economy would unravel. It would be the most efficient path to victory. A complete and total cessation of their threat. A ledger cascade. The economic equivalent of a supernova. You cannot save a body by preserving the cancer. Jian Li looked horrified. That would be genocide by accounting. We can't do that. Dr. Thorne was pale. It would be a catastrophe unlike anything the galaxy has seen in 1,000 years. Trillions of lives would be ruined. Not just the ruling class, but ordinary Cathar citizens who have no say in the policies of their dominion. This was the true test. Rostova had wielded the law as a weapon, the ledger as a shield. But Solon was now proposing to use the ledger as a bomb, to win the legal war by making the enemy's entire existence mathematically impossible. It was a perfect, logical, and monstrous solution. Rostova turned away from the holographic display, her own reflection, a ghostly image on the dark bulkhead. No, she said the word a solid thing in the silent room. We are not here to destroy civilizations. We are here to stop predators. There is a difference. We will not trigger a collapse. Solon's light pulsed. Commander, your directive is inefficient. It prioritizes the welfare of the aggressor's civilian population over a decisive victory. This choice reduces our probability of success by 42%. Your calculation is noted, Solon Rostova replied, her voice firm. But some things are not measured in percentages. We will expose the illegality of their treaties. We will free their client worlds one by one if we have to. But we will not burn their home world to do it. Find me another way. Justice is not the same as annihilation. The distinction is everything. The work was grueling. The Vindicator's crew, led by Solon, dove into the Cathar's public records. They worked for weeks, sleeping in shifts as their ship sped towards the judicial capital of the galaxy. They were no longer diplomats or soldiers. They were forensic accountants poring over millennia of contracts, trade manifests, and debt instruments. And they found it. Not just a pattern, but a blueprint. A standardized predatory contract template that the Cathar had used for centuries, with only minor variations to ensnare dozens of developing worlds. They built a case not on emotion or morality, but on the Cathar's own systemic, repeated, and documented violation of their foundational laws. They had proof of an empire-wide criminal enterprise. As they prepared their countersuit, a vignette from one of the collared worlds played on a secondary screen. A small furred being, a historian on a world called Cygnus X1, had been given access to the Haven verdict. He sat in a dusty archive surrounded by his people's history, most of which was now dedicated to servicing their debt of gratitude to the Cathar. Tears streamed down his face as he read the humans' legal arguments. He was not just seeing a legal victory. He was seeing a vocabulary for freedom, a way to articulate the injustice his people had suffered for generations. He began to write. Hope is a seed that can lie dormant for an age waiting for the right light. They arrived at Aurora Court. The station was a breathtaking sight, a city of light and law floating in the black. The Vindicator docked in a bay reserved for parties in a formal dispute. They were now officially defendants in a case that could see them exiled from the galaxy. Rostova, Thorn, and Lee, accompanied by a silent mobile emitter for Solon's avatar, walked the corridors of the station. The air hummed with 1,000 different languages, the whisper of energy beings, the clatter of crystalline feet. This was the heart of galactic civilization, and they were here as accused criminals. Their trial was to be held before a triumvirate of adjudicators, ancient beings who had presided over the Concordat's highest court for millennia. The Cathar delegation was led by a new emissary, a creature named Voral Kor, far older and colder than the one Rostova had faced at Haven. He was not a field agent. He was a master of the system, his carapace scarred and polished by centuries of legal battles. He regarded the humans with an undisguised, chilling contempt. The trial began. The Cathar laid out their case with ruthless precision. They showed sensor logs of the energy feedback loop. They presented expert testimony on the damage to their ship. They argued that the Vindicator's mirrored response was a disproportionate and illegal act of aggression, a form of economic warfare explicitly forbidden by the Concordat's charter. They did not mention Haven. They did not mention the collar. They framed the entire event as an unprovoked attack. An argument does not have to be true to be effective. When it was Rostova's turn, she did not refute their claims directly. She did not defend her actions. Instead, she announced her intention to file a countersuit. The events at Haven. She stated, her voice calm and clear, in the vast chamber, cannot be understood in isolation. They were the culmination of a pattern of predatory behavior by the Cathar Dominion that spans centuries and dozens of worlds. We are not here to argue the specifics of one energy beam. We are here to put the doctrine of the caller itself on trial. A murmur went through the assembled observers. This was a dramatic escalation. Voralkor's mandibles clicked in irritation, but a flicker of something else was in his eyes. A flicker of fear. He had expected a defense. He was not prepared for an assault. The adjudicators conferred their forms of light swirling together. After a moment, the central adjudicator spoke its voice a chorus of harmonious tones. A countersuit of this magnitude is unprecedented. However, the evidence presented in the Haven inquiry gives your claim standing. We will allow it. But be warned, Terran. If you make such a claim and fail to prove it, the penalty will be severe. The stage was set. Rostova had bet everything on one audacious move. She had turned their trial into the trial of the century. The best defense is to prove the plaintiff has no right to be in court. Solon began to present the evidence. One by one, the AI displayed the treaties the Cathar had with other worlds. It highlighted the same illegal clause in each one, the non-finite percentage-based tithe. It showed economic data from each world, demonstrating the same pattern of technological stagnation and resource drain seen on Haven. It was a slow, meticulous, and utterly damning presentation. A story of systemic exploitation told in the cold, irrefutable language of numbers. For 2 days, Solon spoke its calm, alto voice, laying bare the rot at the heart of the Cathar Empire. The Cathar delegation grew more and more agitated. Voralkor tried to object, claiming the information was proprietary, that it was a violation of their sovereignty. But the adjudicators overruled him. The Haven precedent had unlocked the ledgers. The records were now public. The Cathar had been caught in a legal trap of their own, making sprung by a verdict they had been too arrogant to foresee. A secret is only a secret until the right question is asked in public. But the Cathar had one last card to play. Voralkor, in a brilliant and desperate move, did not try to defend the treaties. He confessed to them. Yes, he boomed, his voice resonating through the chamber. We are a stern patron. We demand much of those we guide. But what the Terrans call predation, we call survival. Our worlds are dying. Our resources are finite. The tithes are not for enrichment. They are for the continued existence of our species. What the Terrans ask you to do is to sign our death warrant to punish us for the crime of refusing to go quietly into the dark. He was reframing the argument again. From law to morality. He was asking for pity. He was portraying the Cathar as victims forced into their actions by circumstance. It was a powerful emotional appeal, and it resonated with many of the species in the court, who had faced their own struggles for survival. Rostova saw her case so carefully built on logic and law beginning to crumble under the weight of this new emotional narrative. She had to respond. But how, she could not deny their hardship. To do so would make humanity look cruel and heartless. She felt a nudge in her mind, a private transmission from Solon. It was a single data file. Rostova opened it. It was a deep archive scan of the Cathar's own public records from centuries ago. It was a series of philosophical and legal debates from their own scholars from a time before their decline. The subject was the doctrine of the caller, and in it Rostova found her answer. Not an attack, not a denial. A mirror. The past is a country from which we are all exiled, but its laws sometimes still apply. Rostova stood. Emissary Voralkor speaks of survival, and we of the Terran fleet sympathize with any species facing extinction. But the doctrine of the caller was not created as a tool of survival. It was created as a tool of honor. She looked directly at Voralkor. Your own great legal scholar Cor Vela, in her commentaries on the Scroll of Counted Deeds, wrote of the doctrine's true purpose. Shall I quote her for you? Voralkor was silent. Rostova continued, her voice ringing with the words of a long-dead Cathar. The strong must not prey upon the weak, for that is the way of beasts. The strong must guide the weak, and the weight of that guidance is a debt of honor. But that debt must be finite so that the student may one day stand as an equal to the teacher. For the goal of a true teacher is not to create a permanent student, but to create a new master. The doctrine of the caller, in its purest form, was about uplift, about creating peers, not about creating slaves to prop up a failing state. She had not used a human argument. She had used their own history, their own highest ideals against them. She had shown them not what they were, but what they had intended to be. She had mirrored their past back at their present. The silence in the court was absolute. Voralkor had no response. To argue against Cor Vela would be to commit blasphemy against his own culture. The Cathar's emotional defense had been dismantled by the words of their own saint. An ideal is the most dangerous weapon to use against those who have betrayed it. The adjudicators did not need long to deliberate. Their verdict was swift and devastating. The Cathar Dominion was found guilty of systemic predatory economic practices in violation of both Concordat Charter and their own foundational laws. All existing gratitude tithes were declared illegal and voided. The Dominion was placed under severe economic sanctions, its voting rights in the Concordat suspended until it could prove it had reformed its ways. But the adjudicators added one final crucial ruling. It was Rostova's victory, but it came with a cost she had not anticipated. The Terran fleet's use of a mirrored energy array as a punitive measure is a dangerous new precedent. While deemed justified in this specific context, its unregulated use cannot be permitted. The technology of mirror justice, as it is now being called, will be placed under strict Concordat regulation. Humanity may have taught the galaxy a new way to fight, but it is a way that will now be watched and controlled. They had won, but they had also given the galaxy a new reason to fear them. They were the people who could dismantle an empire without firing a shot. They wielded laws like scalpels and ledgers like hammers. They had earned respect, but they had lost their innocence. That was the cost of victory. Another was more personal. A few days later, Dr. Aris Thorne requested a transfer to a quiet academic post, admitting that he could no longer stomach the cold, hard calculus of this new form of justice. The public ledger entry blinked, confirmed across the galactic net, visible in 1 trillion homes on 1 million worlds. The precedent was locked. The Cathar empire of debt was over. The Vindicator floated silently in the docking bay at Aurora Court, its mission complete. On the bridge, Rostova stood before the main view screen, which showed the swirling, indifferent stars. The cool, ozonated air felt heavy. The hum of the ship was the only sound. She had upheld the law. She had protected the innocent. She had honored her ideals by refusing to become a monster to fight one. And yet the victory felt like a burden. She had stared into the abyss of cold, hard logic, and it had stared back. She had not blinked, but she knew she would carry the chill of that gaze forever. Justice was not a warmth. It was a weight, a responsibility to see the system not just for what it is, but for what it ought to be, and to have the courage to correct the discrepancy no matter the cost. She had balanced the ledger for an entire section of the galaxy, and the price was a piece of her own soul. The universe would now remember that humanity keeps very, very good records.